I want to introduce you to Juliana Terlizzi, who also has had experiences of these delays. Now, Juliana was raped in 2020 and has waived her right to anonymity to speak to us. The man who raped her was sentenced to more than 13 years in jail, having been found guilty in January. Juliana, good morning.
Good morning, Naga. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? And, I want to know, now this man has been found guilty in January, how has that affected you? Have you been able to kind of feel at least you have justice?
Well, at the end of the day, justice really, nothing's going to change what happened to me.
Of course.
But there is a sense of relief that he is not able to hurt anyone else. So it is a relief. It is also a recognition of the danger that he was. He got a total sentence of 18 years, which to me is a relief because I went to the police, even contacted the justice legal system, the CPS, because he was on bail during the whole time that he was awaiting trial. He was on Tinder the whole time that he was awaiting trial. So, yes, I am relieved, but it's shocking that I had to wait nearly 2 years to have my life back.
And I know he was sentenced last week, but what has it been like over those 2 years? I mean, in terms of, I can only imagine it's added trauma.
It was horrible. It was the most horrific experience. I was constantly in fear for my life. I spent nearly or more than 8 months without leaving my apartment. So instead of having suspect, and he was more than a suspect. The evidence was overwhelming. He had a video which he recorded of the sexual assault where he admits that he's committing the sexual assault, and he was still on bail. So that meant that I was in turn put on forced house arrest. So after that, I was diagnosed with PTSD. I still suffer from anxiety. It's still very recent. I wasn't able to leave my house unaccompanied. But now that it's finally over, I guess I get to start to rebuild my life and start to heal. I think that's the most important part, because people forget that victims are still victims until the trial happens. So this backlog, with this amount of time that we have to wait, it's not just waiting. We can't move on with our lives. It's not, it's not a robbery. It's not other kind of crimes that happen that have backlogs. So we have a bigger sense of urgency, of resolution, of, being able to feel safe and be able to move on. And that's not happening. It's a big concern for me and for other victims as well.
Now, Daw QC is the barrister who represented you in this case, and Chris is also with us. Chris, hello.
Good morning.
How could you explain to Juliana why this was taking so long?
Well, first of all, I think there's a really important message here, which is that, those who are the victims of these kinds of crimes, it's incredibly traumatizing and difficult. But for the reasons that Juliana gave and the reasons that she persevered over all those years, it's really important that people who are victims of these sorts of crimes do report their attackers to the police and do ensure that people who commit rape and other very serious sexual offences are prosecuted, are taken off the streets, and in this case, of course, for a very long time. Because if that doesn't happen, sadly, they will inevitably go on and commit offences against other people. So, all I can say about Juliana's case is the tribute that I could pay to her bravery, her resilience in the face of a system that was basically spitting in her face and treating her like nothing. She was ignored by the police. She was ignored by, almost everybody in the system for long periods of time. She was even crying out that there had been other victims of this man, and some of this information wasn't brought to the attention of the court that eventually granted him bail. And as Juliana says, once he was on bail, she had to live completely in fear for month after month after month.
Well, it
So
brings
her
up
bravery,
it brings up two issues. Sorry for interrupting. It brings up two issues. One, which we will come to, when people hear this, they will be reluctant to report because this is an extension of that attack in many ways. But also, it brings up the fact, and Juliana said that, there was video evidence where he basically said he knew what he was doing when he attacked her. And so I don't even know how this could be put aside, and you tell me, as a complicated case, one that, and of course every case needs to be thoroughly examined and thoroughly argued and defended and prosecuted. But I'm not saying it was black and white, but it doesn't sound complicated.
I can tell you this as someone who's been a criminal lawyer for almost 30 years. I had as part of my sort of duties in representing Juliana, I sadly had to watch the video of her being attacked, and I had to listen to what he said as he gloated and boasted about the sexual attack that he was committing against her. That video was not shown to the judge who granted him bail in the very early stages of the case. I wasn't there. I was advising Juliana, but this case was prosecuted by the Crown Prosecution Service and the police, so I wasn't party directly to the proceedings. But all I know is that there were a series of catastrophic mess-ups by all of those involved, whereby someone who was plainly and obviously dangerous was allowed to live amongst us and pose a danger to others for well over a year on bail. And I mean, it's just one example. I mean, Juliana, has been very brave in waiving her anonymity so that people can hear, that this is a real person. These are real victims who are affected when these things happen. But sadly, up and down the country, there are thousands and thousands of victims of these cases whose lives are utterly destroyed, and the system is making it worse.
Juliana,
yes,
knowing what you know about the system and the amount of time it took, extraordinary amount of time it took to bring about a prosecution and conviction and sentencing, if you knew that, would that have put you off from reporting this? Because this is the other concern.
I mean, absolutely. Unfortunately, I would say yes. At the same time, you have to remember, in cases with sexual assault and rape, you still have to prove that this crime happened. I was lucky to have that amount of evidence. Most people don't have that. That just shows how the system is not working. In this case that was black and white, there was failings. But at the same time, as it's a personal decision. For me, I was worried about other women. Mm-hmm. I knew there had been other victims before me, and I wanted to stop with me. So I took it, and I had the ability to do that. I had the means. I was able to quit my job. I was able to stay at home. Most people can't do that. So it's a very hard choice to make. I made it because I didn't want him to abuse anyone else. But I think the system really gave me all the reasons to quit. And trust me, I felt like quitting every single day. So something needs to change. There needs to be better, training. There needs to be better dealing with victims. Like I was treated as a suspect the whole time. I wasn't giving the proper information. And I don't want to put off victims, but at the same time, I know that I became even more traumatized than I was before I reported the crime. And wow. I think if I hadn't had this outcome, I can't even imagine how I would have dealt with it.
Chris, from a technical point of view, you're at the sharp end. What needs to happen? How quickly can it happen?
Well, the simple fact is that I think your listeners need to ask themselves a question, which is, do we care about the justice system in this country? Because your listeners are listening to what happens when you destroy a justice system. And that happened in the spending cuts of the early 2010 period. 40% cut in the justice budget, the largest cut of any government department. The price that's been paid by our society for those cuts has been huge numbers of court closures, thousands of lawyers leaving the profession. profession, massive increases in backlogs and waiting lists even before COVID came along. So the question is this: does anybody care enough for us to invest in the way that we're able to come together as a nation in a time of crisis and throw hundreds of billions of pounds at solving our economy, at solving our health issues and solving COVID? For a tiny fraction of that, we could double the number of Crown Courts operating probably within 2 to 3 years. We could clear this backlog within that period of time, and we could guarantee justice for victims within 6 months in every single case. It's achievable. It will cost 10 to 20 billion pounds. The question for everyone out there is, do we want to vote for parties that are going to make that change? And if we do, start writing to your MPs. Tell them you're disgusted about what you've just heard on the radio. Tell them you're disgusted about the delays for victims waiting trial, and get your politicians to finally get some level of interest in this justice system that they couldn't care less about.
Do you think they're going to find the money? 10 to 20 billion pounds.
They found the money to pay hundreds of billions. They spent, 40 odd billion on failed track and trace, which we're going to be paying for forever. They have found hundreds of billions.
I suppose my point is that we're being told there isn't money.
Well, we're being told that, so that's the price.
Whether money has been wasted or not in the past, the fact is where we are now. I mean, it's a massive number, isn't it?
We pay the price. So let's just accept. Mm-hmm. Let's say to Juliana and to all the other victims of these crimes, we just can't afford for you to have justice. So you will live in your home as a prisoner whilst a violent rapist is out on the streets, because our system doesn't have the resources to deal with it properly and get him locked up in a timely way. Just tell every rape victim in the country we can't afford to look after you.
We're not going to do that, because obviously you know how important it is that women do report this, and that those perpetrators are brought to justice. But I sense your anger. I'm not even going to say frustration, anger, and it's one that many people will share with you. Juliana, this man was sentenced last week, and I asked you at the beginning, how you move on now. Do you feel in a place now where some semblance of your previous life can be brought back and you can move forward?
I mean, I think I can move forward from this. I think, the experience that I had, and all I can think now is other victims. All I can think is the experience they're currently living, which I was living for so long. And I feel like I need to be able to speak about this and support them and work for, promote change, because, people need to know that this is happening. People need to know that there is no justice, and everyone should be entitled to having justice. And
you are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. And you've waived your right to anonymity to talk to us, and I think that has been so important, and it will make a massive difference. And I'm in full admiration of you for just persevering and continuing. And you obviously have been through something hellish. It's hellish. And Chris Daw QC, I know you've represented Juliana, and I hear your fury. I understand your fury. And thank you so much as well for talking to us and kind of telling us about this and opening our eyes to what's happening. Chris, thank you. Juliana, I wish you well. And thank you so much again for talking to me.